Okay, so in this video we're going to be looking at the Herodotus sources on the Battle of Marathon. So in your source book you're going to need to find Herodotus 6.94 to 124. So this part of Herodotus is going to be talking through the causes of the battle, and then it's going to go through the battle itself, and then obviously the sort of outcome and the results for the two sides. You don't necessarily need to understand the ins and outs of the battle itself. It will talk about different wings and who was on which wings. I've highlighted the key people as I've gone through the video. Through the source, on this video, so hopefully that will narrow down what you're going to be talking about. So hopefully you've now found Herodotus 6.94 in your source book. So it's giving you the first sentence here which says Athens and Aegina grappled together in war. This is well before the Persian War. It's just sort of Herodotus' starting point. Then it says the Persian was going about his own business. It's talking about the Persian king Darius. So his own business, for his servant was constantly reminding him to remember the Athenians. So remember, this is a reference to the Ionian revolt, and obviously Darius was really angry with the Athenians for sending aid to help the Ionians. So he's got the servant, according to Herodotus, that tells him every single day, and the servant's told to do him this. It's not the servant being a pain. The servant is told to remind him, remember the Athenians, remember the Athenians, remember the Athenians. Okay, and he's also got a member of his council of this gentleman's name, who I have no idea how to pronounce, also maligning the Athenians, or also kind of bad-mouthing the Athenians. So he's got loads of people telling him, remember the Athenians, aren't they terrible? So moreover, Darius desired to take this pretext for subduing all the men of Hellas who were not given him earth and water. So he's saying, essentially, he's using the Ionian revolt and the Athenians as an excuse to go into Greece, Hellas, and invade. And anybody who is not submitted, so is not agreed for a Persian rule, so those who have not given earth and water, he's going to take them over. So he dismissed from command Mardonius, who had fared so badly on his expedition, probably not a bad decision, let's be honest, and appointed other generals to lead his armies against Athenia and Eretria. Datis, so this is a key general, hence why he's highlighted, tells you his background, and his own nephew Artaphernes. So these are two key people you need to be aware of. Really helpfully, as is the way in the Greek world, that his father was also called exactly the same thing. It happens quite a few times in these sources. Anyway, so Darius gives the order he gave them at their departure was to enslave Athens and Eretria and bring the slaves into his presence. So this is the pretext for the Battle of Marathon. Darius wants revenge for Ionia. He also wants to take over Greece and then sort of enslave everybody, according to Herodotus. So when these appointed generals on their way from the king reached the Alaean, path in Sicilia, bringing with them a great and well-furnished army, they camped there and were overtaken by all the fleet that was assigned to each. So one thing you need to be aware of on this course is thinking for different reasons why the Persians lost the Persian War. Spoiler alert. And one thing we have to consider is whether or not the Persian army was actually prepared for war and had the right armaments and the right army. So as well as the fleet, we have the arrival of the horses, which in the previous year Darius had bidden his tributary subjects to make ready. So one thing we also need to be aware of, which I've not particularly highlighted here, is the effects of conflict for the Persian War and as well as the Peloponnesian War. So the fact that those who were loyal to Persia had to give horses, you could talk about an economic effect of having to supply the horses. Anyway, having loaded the horses into these and embarked the land army and the ships, they sailed to Ionia with 600 triremes. So there's a massive fleet going from Persia. From there they held the course not by the mainland and straight towards the Hellespont and Thrace, but setting forth from Samos. They sailed by the Ecrian Sea from island to island. This, to my thinking, was because they feared above all the voyage around Athos, seeing that in the previous year they had come to great disaster by holding their course that way. Moreover, Naxos was still unconquered and constrained by them. So basically, they're learning from the mistakes that Mardonius had made when he had tried to set sail and conquer Greece the year before. And they want to also take over Naxos while they're at it. When they approached Naxos from the Ecrian Sea and came to land, for it's Naxos which the Persians intended to attack first, this is part of sort of the battle plan, the Naxians, remembering what had happened before, fled away to the mountains instead of waiting for them. The Persians enslaved all of them that they caught and burnt their temples and their cities. So here's a really clear effect of conflict. Obviously, you've got people being enslaved, you've also got temples being burnt and the city being burned. So there's social effects, there's economic effects of this particular battle. After doing this, they set sail for the other islands. So literally, the Persians are going island hopping. You will notice as I go through the source, there'll be sections where I've not highlighted. I'll explain why I've not highlighted them at this particular point as I go through. One of them is when they go to Delos, which is another island, and essentially Datus lands and is like, why do you guys flee? And they don't really answer him, they just flee. So that is basically what this section says. So we're not particularly interested in what happens at Delos. However, we're now getting slightly more to the point. Datus sailed with his army against Eretria first. So they're moving their way towards Athens. He takes with him some Ionians and Aeolians. That's really hard to say. And again, still talking about Delos as an earthquake, which is an omen, which is essentially what... this is pretty much all what this is talking about, and no one's really surprised that there's an earthquake in Delos. Fun story, Herodotus, thank you very much. So launching out to sea from Delos, the Athenians, the foreigners put in at the islands and gathered an army from there, taking the sons of the islands for hostages. So again, we've got more effects of conflict. So they're basically taking islands and forcing people to fight for them as they go around. When in their voyage about the islands, they put in... oh, I don't know how to say that, sorry. They gave them no hostages and refused to join them neighbouring cities. Because these guys don't submit, they're besieged and their land is destroyed. And in the end, these guys do also come over to their side. So again, we're talking about the effects of conflict here. It's not effects of the Battle of Marathon specifically, but it is effects of general conflict. The Persians are going around and laying waste to lots of different city-states, which is obviously really bad for the city-state. So when the Atraeans learned that the Persian expedition was sailing to attack them, they asked for help from the Athenians. Obviously, if you think about Athenians' background, they'd helped Ionia, so it's not a big surprise that another city-state would go to Athens first. So the Athenians did not refuse the aid, so they're going to help them, but gave for them defenders, the 4,000 tenant farmers who had held the land of the Chalcidian horse breeders. So they give them some defence. You can highlight this if you want to. But it all seems that the plans of the Atraeans were unsound. They sent to the Athenians for aid, but the councils were divided. One thing we need to be aware of, which I am going to highlight, there we go, is that often the Greeks were quite divided over what to do about the Persians, whether in battle or dealing with the Persians in general. So remember, we're talking about the Greek states. Some of them were Medizing, so becoming Persian, some were not. And there's often divisions within the generals at varying battles, because they all come from different city-states. They've all got different ideas and different ways of dealing with things. So we have here another example of some Greeks being divided about what to do. So some planned to leave the city and make for the heights of Euboea. Others plotted treason and hoping to win advantages from the Persians. So some want to flee and obviously probably go and fight with the Athenians eventually, and others just want to Medize. So it's a tension amongst all of these different city-states. So when we have this guy here, learns both designs, he tells the Athenians who had come, there we go, how matters stood, asked them to part their own country so they would not perish like the rest. So the Athenians basically come. They're told, look, we're divided, some want to flee, some want to fight, we don't know what to do, please come help us. Oh, sorry, and that's what they decide to do. So they save themselves by crossing over to Oropus, I think. The Persians sailed, holding their course for Temenos and that place, and Aegilia, all in Eretrian territory. So landing at this place, the BD unloaded the horses and made preparation to attack their animals. So they get the horses off. I will do that as well. The Eretrians had no intention of coming out and fighting, for all their care was to guard their walls if they could. Makes sense. Since it was the prevailing council not to leave the city. So that's the decision they eventually made. The walls were strongly attacked, and for 6 days many fell on both sides. On the 7th, 2 Eretrians of repute, to be honest, I don't care who they are, betrayed the city to the Persians. The Persians come in, they plunder and burn the temples, again, effects of conflict, and revenge for the temples that were burnt at Sardis as part of the Ionian revolt, and they enslave the townspeople according to Darius's command. So the Persians, at this point, are doing quite well. They've taken over Eretria, they've taken over Naxos, and a couple of other islands. So everything's on course for a Persian victory at this particular point. So then we move on to the battle itself. So after subduing Eritrea, the Persians waited a few days and sailed away to the land of Attica. So they're now heading towards Athens. Remember, Attica is the surrounding land of Athens. Pressing ahead in expectation of doing to the Athenians exactly what they'd done to the Eritreans. They've done well. They're quite confident, unsurprisingly. Marathon was the place in Attica most suitable for riding horses and closest to Eritrea. So Hippias, he was if you might remember from doing the summer work, Hippias was a tyrant of Athens who'd fled, and he fled to Persia. So he's coming back because he wants to take over Athens, and he is in control of these particular horses and the men. When the Athenians learned this, they too marched out to Marathon with 10 generals leading them. Okay, so they're going out to meet the Persians. There's 2 really important leaders within these 10 generals. There's this guy called Miltiades. He basically he had been exiled from Athens and then was brought back. What Herodotus now does in this section here is gives you a really unexciting history of his horse riding ability at the Olympic Games. That's basically it, and his father, who's also very good at riding horses. So I'm going to skip this because this is of absolutely no relevance other than discovering that they can ride horses. Anyway, so this is the Miltiades, who's now the Athenian general. Okay, after coming from I can't say that, and escaping a death, fine. So again, this is all about him escaping the Persians. It's part of this anecdote about the horses, and they appoint him general, and he's been voted in by the people through democracy. Again, not a huge amount to highlight here. So while still in the city, the generals first sent to Sparta a herald. So there's this guy who is... His name's not important, but if you know the history of Marathon, you know there's a guy who runs to Sparta, tells them, and then runs back to Athens and runs again, and then dies after running. This is this guy. This is what this story is going on about. And it gives you a really, again, a weird anecdote about Pan and the Athenians deciding to believe in Pan. But again, it's literally not relevant, so we're going to skip it. So this guy here, Philippides, was in Sparta on the day after leaving the city of Athens, so he's really fast. At that time he was sent by the generals. Again, Pan is there, helpful. Either way, he finally gets to Sparta and speaks to the magistrates. So the Lacedaemonians, which is the Spartans, the Athenians ask you to come to their aid and not allow the most ancient city amongst the Greeks to fall into slavery at the hands of the foreigners, Persians. Even now, Eritrea has been enslaved, and Greece has become weaker by an important city. I.e., please help, because we're going to struggle. He told them what you in order to say, and they resolved to send help to the Athenians. So yet Sparta's like, yes, we're going to send help. However, they could not do this immediately, for they were unwilling to break the law. So there is basically a festival, a religious festival going on. It's the 9th day, and they said that they can't go to war until the moon's circle is full. So they can't leave until there's a full moon. Okay. So they're waiting until the full moon, and the foreigners are guided to Marathon by Hippias. I should highlight that really. And then we have Herodotus doing Herodotus as usual, where Hippias has had this horrible dream about sleeping with his mother. He then sort of lands and he happens to sneeze and cough, and he loses some teeth. And he makes a bit of a joke about, his land is not as ours. We will not be able to do it. My tooth holds more, whatever share it is of mine. Yeah, okay. Moving swiftly on. So Hippias supposed that the dream in this way come true, as the Athenians were marshalled into the prescient of Heracles. The Plataeans came to help them in full force. So it's not just the Athenians on their own. They've also got the help of people from Plataea, the Plataeans. And again, Herodotus is going to give you a potted history of why. And essentially, it is that Athens had helped them previously, fighting someone else. The Thebians, that's it. The Thebes had fought against Plataea. Athens had helped. And as a result, the Plataeans were loyal to Athens. And that is what all this is going on about. Again, not particularly relevant to the Battle of Marathon, other than telling you why they were there. What we do have is Athenian generals, again, being quite divided. So the Athenian generals have a divided opinion. Some advocating not fighting because they were too few to attack the army of the Persians. They were vastly, vastly outnumbered. And then you have others, including Miltiades, who wants to fight. So they're at odds. And at this point, they are waiting because they can't decide what to do. So remember there's 10 generals, so obviously it's like literally 50-50 split, so they don't quite know what to do. An 11th man had a vote, chosen by lot to be the polemarch of Athens. So this would be like the lead general. And his vote was of equal weight with all the generals, so basically he has the deciding vote. So they vote in Callimachus, and Miltiades goes to Callimachus and is just like, look, you can either enslave the Athenians or make her free. And that's kind of the choice he gives. And he talks about how that Athens is in great danger, and that, if we lose, or if we don't fight, we'll be handed over to Hippias, who remember was this tyrant who was really awful to the Athenians, hence why they kicked him out. But he says, if we win, Athens will take first place amongst Hellenic cities. So Athens will gain this great reputation. And he says, I can say that's happened, how the deciding vote on these matters has been devolved on you. The generals are dividing opinions, some urge attack, some not. If we do not attack now, I expect that great strife will fall upon and shake the spirit of Athenians, leading them to Medias. So he said, if we don't do something, Athens is just going to capitulate and they'll go over to the Persians. And a lot of Greek states, including Sparta, thought that if the Athenians Mediased, then that was the end of Greece. So this is what sort of the argument that Miltiades is playing on. Okay? So he's sort of saying, we could win this if the gods are on our side. And Miltiades is able to win over Callimachus. So the polemarchs voted counted in. The decision to attack was resolved upon. So they are going to attack. Thereafter, generals who had voted to fight turned the presidency over to Miltiades. He accepted the offers but did not make an attack of his own day to preside. So basically, each general would control the battle on their chosen day. So I would choose it on Monday, then Tuesday would be a different one, so on and so forth. So the generals who had originally voted to fight said, each day they gave Miltiades the presidency, so it would be his decision. So yes, he said, yeah, that's fine, but he doesn't actually attack until it's his own day, because it's his plan, I guess. So when the presidency comes around to him, so they've been waiting a few days for it to come round, he brings the Athenians for battle, with the polemarch commanding the right side, because that's what the polemarchs do, and Miltiades and the other tribes, sorry, I'm reading it. He leads all the other city-states and different tribes. And then we have the Plataeans on the west wing. Okay? What they've done is basically put all their strong forces on each wing. And so the centre is quite weak, but the wings are really, really strong. And this is going to prove really important later on. This is the only part of knowing about battle lines that you need to be really aware of at this particular one. So they set in order, they've done some sacrifices, and so the Athenians have sent forth and charged the foreigners at a run. So they quite literally just kind of run screaming at the Persians. And the Persians see them running and are prepared to thinking that they're absolutely nuts, as you would probably do. And they sort of saw how few of them there were, and they ran so fast without even cavalry. So they're quite literally descending the centre, running at the Persians with no protection. And the Persians are sitting there going, what on earth are these guys doing? This is really weird, because it is quite strange. It's quite a bold policy. So they think, right, basically this is going to be really, really easy. We can win, fine. So what actually ends up happening is quite a long battle, because it kind of catches the Persians off balance. So obviously in the centre where it's really weak, the Persians do quite well. And that's where they sort of centre their attack. And they break through in pursuit inland, but that is a trap, it turns out. So on each wing, the Athenians and the Plataeans prevailed. And in victory, they let the routed foreigners flee and brought the wings together to fight those who'd been broken through the centre. So they're basically encircling them. So the Persians are focused on fighting in the middle because that's where the weak line's in, and the two wings are fighting really well because they're the strongest. Once they kill those guys, they encircle the centre and they rout out the foreigners, which is not what the Persians were expecting them to do. Because remember, the Persians have been caught off guard by just Athenians running at them shouting. So the Athenians win. I mean, obviously I appreciate there's Plataeans there too, but essentially the Persian War is the Battle of Marathon, is an Athenian success. So they win and they follow the fleeing Persians and kill them. They reach the sea and they demand a foreign aid hold of the ships. They burn some ships. In the battle, Callimachus is killed. He's really brave. And again, we don't really care about what happened to him. A bit harsh but true. And loads of Athenians die. The Athenians also capture 7 ships. And then the Persians flee with the rest, and they pick up some slaves. And what they're hoping to do is reach Athens. So they've lost this particular battle, but they're going to sail round and try and attack Athens by sea instead. And they sort of think, oh, good lord. So the Athenians march back to the city to defend it, like really fast, like surprisingly fast. And somehow they got there before the Persians arrived. And supposedly the Persians sort of sailed into near Athens, and quite like they put the soldiers up on the city walls, kind of staring at the Persians. And that's when the Persians kind of think, oh, okay, we can't do it. Fair enough. So they sail back to Asia. So they go back to Persia. So the Battle of Marathon is over. Athens is won. Surprisingly, they managed to march back to the Athens very quickly, and the Persians think, yeah, no, we're not going to try again because they've defended their city. And in this part of Herodotus, we get a little bit of information about the scale of the victory. So the Battle of Marathon, about 6,400 men of the Persians were killed, which is obviously a lot, and only 192 Athenians killed. So despite being massively outnumbered, the Athenians barely lost any lives, and they obviously slaughtered a lot of Persians. So it was a huge military success for the Athenians. They take the glory. So after the full moon, 2,000 Spartans came to Athens, so they eventually arrived. They'd gone really quickly. They tried to get there before the battle had ended, and although they came too late for the battle, they desired to see the Persians, so they went to Marathon and saw that they were dead, and then they left praising the Athenians and their achievements. So, the Spartans are impressed, and everybody's impressed. This is an amazing victory by the Athenians. So we then have this bit about the Persian defeat, which, as you can see, I have not highlighted at all, because it's going on about a shield and whether or not the Athenians were using the shield as a symbol for something, which is, I think, a little bit unclear in the source. And this guy here is like really brave, and he's basically debating whether or not they would have used this shield, and he's sort of saying, well, they wouldn't have used the shield because it was a sign of tyrants. They didn't like tyrants. And that is eventually what this 4 bits here do. I would obviously recommend reading it through yourself, but in terms of the Battle of Marathon, it's not especially helpful. I suppose we could highlight, if I reread it. So we've got the Persians desire to make Athens subject, so they want to take them over. We know that the Athenians are tyrant haters, okay. And then, I'm going to be honest, clearly Herodotus has a thing about horses, because he goes on about them a lot. That is about it. I mean, so, they held up a shield, signs they shunned tyrants, and the shield is supposed to be a symbol of it. So why would they hold up a shield? And maybe they didn't and did. And this story doesn't really come to any conclusion. Anyway, so that is the sources on the Battle of Marathon.